What's up? Today we're going to be reviewing Aron's views on the historical Jesus and really just showing why this representative of what majority of unbelievers believe is very. He apparently hasn't done much research on anything relating to this. So.
Yeah, this is going to be interesting.
And we're not attacking low-hanging fruit either. I mean, this guy's pretty popular.
Fingers crossed. Hello, everyone. Welcome to an episode of Ramen number 77. I do believe this time around we have Jonathan Tweet. Going to be a little different from our usual fare. He is going to be arguing that there is historical evidence for Jesus, or evidence for historical Jesus, whichever is more appropriate for that. Mr. Tweet, how do you do, sir?
Very good. Nice to see you again.
Now, this is not going to be a scholarly conversation because I remember in your debate with Richard Carrier, you confessed that you did not have like scholarly accolades, nor of course do I. I'm not going to be arguing for Carrier's position because I don't entirely understand it myself, so I would embrace it if I did. I have a different perspective, and I'm going to be listening to you give yours, and we're just going to be two laymen discussing this as best we can.
Yeah. No.
So you on the historicity of Jesus. I mean, obviously, I've got a number of problems with him, and as I said, they're not the same problems as what Richard Carrier would have. I mean, like once upon a time, I believe that Jesus was this first century faith healer and all that. But then a number of other things that I happen to come across with reader, through association with mythicists and whatnot, I realize that these things don't add up, and I can no longer consider Jesus to be an actual historical person. What would be your take on that?
Right. Well, like I said in the debate with Dr. Carrier, I can't really prove that Jesus for sure existed. That's sort of beyond what we can do. And so what I would like my fellow atheists to see is that the most plausible or the most likely explanation for how there was a Jesus. Maybe there wasn't, but there's no other story that's equally plausible. And that's my position. And you can believe the plausible story or not, but I think we can put our notes together and see that the mainstream historical account is the most plausible explanation for all the evidence that we have.
I have to disagree right away, but and I'll give my reasons as we proceed. But what are your reasons for thinking a historical Jesus is plausible?
So if you look at my debate with Dr. Carrier, you'll see that he also considers the mainstream account to be plausible. He considers the idea that there was a hillbilly faith healer who got crucified because he was a troublemaker, that is historically plausible. So I think I think people agree that it's plausible. It might not be true, but it's clearly plausible. Okay. There's nothing maybe you would disagree, but if you look at, for example, Dr. Carrier's proposed history of early Christianity, it's far less plausible than the mainstream account.
Okay, well, look, I'm not going to be talking about Carrier's perspective, where he goes up into the angelology. I mean, I would love to have an button with him on that so that he can show me exactly where he's getting some of this. My perspective, as I said, is very different. First of all, we have, of course, Paul, who is not apparently talking about a guy who existed just a generation or two before.
We'll get
into the earliest of the Christian fathers. I mean, we have Luke, for example.
So I'm trying to right here. So Paul talks about Jesus. He clearly talks about him being not too far away from where he was, because Paul talks about the Jews crucifying him on a cross. And Aron thinks that the belief was that Jesus was around 500. The belief in Jesus arose around like 500 years. He thinks it was a long time before the AD, the year 0. And he'll probably lay it out in a little while, but Paul talks about Christ being killed by the Jews. And it just doesn't make any sense for him to say something like that if he doesn't think that Jesus was a very recent figure. And also we know that Paul is going around in a response to the Christian movement, and it seems to be recent in the way he's reacting to it. So it doesn't make any sense for him to be reacting to something that hasn't really caught on, and it doesn't make sense for it not to have caught on and grown exponentially by the time Paul comes around. It seems like it's still starting to grow, like it just started to grow. It doesn't. They would have been a lot bigger of a quote unquote mystery cult than by the time Paul came around, if Aron's thesis is correct, which of course it's not.
Well, I think the issue I would find is that the Jesus movement has been around for 500 years, yet we don't have any account of it up until like around where the Gospels were written and Josephus and stuff like that. So you're you're telling me they didn't write anything about it. There was nothing. And then just suddenly it explodes. Like, I don't, unless you want to just make a giant argument from silence or something.
Yeah, then he talks about some sources he lists later are he's going to list Justin Martyr, which I don't really care what Justin Martyr said because he didn't reflect. I mean, it doesn't matter what he said because he's a couple hundred years later. He's a very late source, so we're going to have to go a bit earlier. And he always talks about how late Josephus and those texts are, but then he uses Justin Martyr, and Justin Martyr's after Josephus. And according to him, this religion would have started a long time ago. So,
Also, Justin Martyr was a basically at that time what would be considered an apologist. And so when he's talking about things that are such as pagan myths and such like that, he's actually combating it. He's not affirming it.
yeah.
We better continue.
For example, and even Mark really seem to be basing their work on other people's work. Or I read something that I think it was Dr. Robert Price, but it may have been a different source. No, I think it was a different source. It was talking about how the Markan free passion narrative, and I wasn't able to pull this up before the podcast. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to have that prepared. But that there was some consideration that the Markan passion narrative is actually based on a different Jesus, and it's also based on Josephus in a reference to a different Jesus, which I think was Jesus.
Oh my God.
And then Luke, when you read Luke being the next century later, before Luke comes up, and then Luke will be describing again his narrative on the Passion is apparently based on Josephus all over again. So Josephus seems more integral to this.
First off, this is assuming the Gospels were written after Josephus. Like, he never tells you why, like, Josephus was written first. He just says, "Oh, look."
Yeah. So there's the only Jewish writing that Mark could have based this on at the time that he's writing this is, if it was Josephus, it might have been Antiquities of the Jew, might have been. But I don't think Jesus being executed appears. No, it's not Antiquities. Sorry, the Jewish War. But that is a history on the. You remember the conflict where they burn the temple and all the gold runs out into the stone, and everybody makes a big scene, and then the Jews get kicked out of Jerusalem. That's what the Jewish War is about. Then Antiquities of the Jews is where we have those passages about Jesus. He calls it like three different Jesuses, but two of the references he says are different Jesuses are actually about the Jesus of the Bible. So they're not copying it off of that. And the Christians wouldn't have copied the Jews during that time because they hated each other. They wouldn't have went like, "Oh, let me borrow your Jewish stuff real quick."
Yeah.
Because the Jews, Paul had at odds with the Jews whenever he talks about the Jews killing the Savior. The Christians didn't take lightly to that. And the Jews didn't take lightly to the Christians running around saying that Jesus was the Son of God, because that was a divine claim, and they thought that was blasphemy.
Right. I don't know. His theory is just weird.
It's take Richard Carrier's theory and then like somehow make it worse.
Even the historicists believe when they constantly cite him as a source.
The best way to improve your videos? With music from Epidemic Sound. Get the safest music.
Well, I mean, if you look at the evidence very differently from how mainstream historians do, you get a very different picture. That what you're describing is very different from what mainstream historians say or what it looks like when I look at those same books. I'll say you're freezing in and out, and so I'm not sure I'm getting everything that you're saying. We sort of jumped right into looking at the Gospels, and I'm wondering if you would indulge me to sort of give your listeners some context and let them know why an atheist like this could be such an interesting topic. Okay. So I've been sort of interested in the historical Jesus for years, just as a historical character. And when I started hanging out with organized atheist 3 years ago. That's when I first discovered Jesus mythicism. And in some ways, I'm like, an atheist's atheist. I've written the first book to teach evolution to preschoolers. I've got a game in the works that teaches clavistics to kids. I've got an atheist blog. I organize atheist debates. But there are a lot of atheists that give me a lot of grief. They call me a fake atheist. They call me a wannabe Christian. They say I'm lying when I say I'm an atheist. And all that's because I say there was a historical Jesus. So I see this really strange effect in the atheist community that talking about historical Jesus is sort of like a heresy or a blasphemy. And people get really kind of nasty. I get personal insults over this.
Right. So on this point, I think this ties into the radicalization of anti-Christian beliefs, right? So you'll notice the more anti-Christian a person is, the more anti-historical Jesus they are. And I think the reason for that is that they want to deny absolutely everything that goes along with the religion. They want nothing there to have to compete with, right? They want nothing of that religion to be there, including a historical Jesus that the Gospels were based around. So I think you'll find is that the more moderate atheists and the more friendly atheists, and as you kind of go that way, they'll accept the historical Jesus. But then the more anti-Christian you get, the more denial of that you get. And I think it's a psychological thing where they feel like it's necessary to deny everything that had happened in history with this religion, or like have to deny everything this religion is based around. And I think that causes some trouble.
Yeah, I'm gonna modify one of Aron's favorite quotes. The more you know, it seems to be the more you know about history, the less likely you are to be a mythicist. I mean, there's only 2 PhD scholars who, maybe 3. I think. I don't know if I'd consider Hector Avalos a scholar or not. He's a professor of religious studies, so I don't know where that. I mean, I guess I guess I'll count him.
But it actually goes with my point though, because he's like super anti-Christian too, though.
So is Carrier, and so is Price.
So is Price.
Well, I don't know if Price is anti. Yeah, he seems like a nice guy. He's just wrong on almost everything he says.
I don't know. Price may be one of the exceptions to the rule, but yeah, you'll notice that the more anti-Christian someone gets, the more
mythicists they are.
The more mythicists they are, and it's kind of funny. Like Carrier, super anti-Christian. Then you got like Hunter or Avalos, and he's super anti-Christian. And then you've got like just these people. You got Aron Ross, super anti-Christian. Godless Engineer, super anti-Christian. Apologia.
Well, he's not a mythicist.
Apologia accepts, right? I think he does.
Because he's not a complete. He at least knows what he's talking about in regards to something like this. But Matt Dillahunty is he's really good about masking his opinion, but he thinks the historical consensus that Jesus was killed by crucifixion is incorrect. So I guess you could label him somewhere in there. Yeah, he always plays that whole "I'm just not convinced."
Right, and being not convinced is just an easy way to get away from actually
having to prove what your beliefs are.
Yeah, like I lack a belief in genes. Like, hey, or I'm just not convinced of genes.
Yep.
Yes. And so that makes me wonder, like, why is this such a big deal?
I'm very surprised, and it's a new thing to me that you're talking about the atheist community as segregating people and say, well, you're not a true atheist.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah, how could that be? I mean, if there was a historical Jesus,
it's almost like Art Raw. He's like he's like, oh no, maybe atheists are actually a little bit more dogmatic than I expressed them to be.
I mean, they are. Some of them are. They're more dogmatic than most uh, people that are Christian that I know.
Yeah, I think.
Like
Well,
they're way more dogmatic than I am. They're way more dogmatic than you are. They're way more dogmatic than almost everybody at my church. Yet they claim to be less religious, but they're always more dogmatic about their beliefs than anybody
well,
else is.
obviously every belief has dogmas, right? I mean, but what's funny is that since atheism apparently has no dogmas, right? Because it's just a lack of belief, but yet it's one of the most dogmatic lack of beliefs out there.
Yeah, they're always well, the really like informed ones and stuff. You know, the people who aren't Hitchens fanboys and stuff. They aren't like they're not really dogmatic. But then the ones who are like every Instagram atheist almost is extremely dogmatic. So are the Twitter ones. So are the Facebook ones. Like, and so are most of the Discord ones. Like, it's really rare to find one that's not like chill.
Yeah, I think again it plays into that. How anti-Christian are they? How open are they?
Like, that's not to say
And,
all the ones on Instagram and stuff are that way, but 99% of them, I would say, are like extremely dogmatic.
right. It's weird because you'll notice that the more anti-Christian they get. For example, you know who Oz from the Atheist Roundtable is, or
Yeah.
yeah, he's like extremely anti-Christian, and you'll notice what does he deny? Oh, Jesus didn't
Jesus.
exist, and then just denies a bunch of different things that he did not like. It is like contrast him to
I know the meaning
say
of life.
to say somebody like Matt, and they're just completely different. And so a lot of it just plays into how willing and open are they, because as soon as you hear someone is a mythicist, then you're realizing they're a lot more they're very closed.
Yeah, they're not. They always seem to be angry. Like, I've never met like especially the ones who are Carrier fans, because he's always angry too.
Right.
And of course, you get called dishonest. But
Yeah, it's just a weird dynamic.
yeah, let's keep going.
We still haven't got into why I don't think there was. Yeah, but if there was a historical Jesus, that is in no way a threat to anybody's position as far as being a skeptic. I mean, as far as regardless of your position. I mean, okay, so if there was a first century faith healer, yeah, it's clear that this guy was not God for a whole lot of different reasons. For one, he didn't know what the smallest seeds were that were known by other farmers in his day.
Oh my God.
Okay. So I just want to point out here, Aron is not telling the truth completely here, at least from his position. He knows if he grants a historical Jesus that the historical consensus is on, he then has to deal with more of the Gospels, and it makes the Christian case better. I mean, not by much, but slightly better. And I think that's why a lot of people are mythicists, is because they don't want to give Christianity that a little tad bit of evidence there. Because if they do, then they feel like they've lost a whole entire skeptic versus Christianity battle.
I think it's a good thing that, or I think now will be a good time to let everybody know you're not you're kind of like a deist though.
Yeah, so I think most of the people that watch this channel know, but yeah, I'm not even a Christian currently. I mean, I'm very close, but I'm not even Christian currently. So a lot of this stuff is like, I criticize Christianity too. I criticize the resurrection too. I criticize the Old Testament too. But at the same time, I want to point out stuff like this, or I want to point out the stuff on the Atheist Roundtable, or I want to point out the stuff, on a lot of these other channels that really hurt non-believers, basically, and their intellectual positions, because I want my non-belief to be intellectually,
Represented.
yeah, and having mythicists and just dogmatic anti-Christian, anti-theists makes it very hard, because it really messes up all the hard work that has been done through the centuries.
That's the same reason why I criticize people like Frank Turek and stuff. It's because I don't want people to look at him and then go, "That's the best," and then, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so it's one of those things where, I want my position and other non-believers' positions to be represented, and these people don't represent it correctly, and so I call it out.
Oh, by the way, I've already got a text that completely destroys what he's about to say. So it's one verse in Galatians 3, but I'll wait till he says something stupid about Jesus being 500 years before.
Victory, for example, he actually said he went against his own Jewish laws by saying that you don't have to wash your hands, as the old Jewish tradition was.
Oh my!
You want to know why that was, people? Because Jesus was fulfilling all those laws.
Yeah, that's the whole.
That's literally the point. That is the entire point of the New Testament.
Yeah,
I'm not sure how you missed that.
That's literally one of Jesus' statements: "Is I have come not to condemn the world," but then he talks about how he came to fulfill the law and the prophets. That means I'm pretty sure he can lift some of those laws away because he fulfilled them.
Right.
First grade reading level required.
Also, think about it. If Jesus is God and he's saying it's okay to not wash your hands, then I'm going to go ahead and say that since God, who set the last rule, is telling you it's okay to break it, then I would think it's okay to break it.
This is a misunderstanding of what the Old Testament was. It wasn't to everybody either. It was, yes, we're supposed to use it, but we aren't supposed. You know what we're saying? We are under the new covenant, not the old covenant. That's not to say to do away with the Old Testament, because a lot of people want to say that we don't have to use the Old Testament anymore. But it's more of a. It's not as we follow the New Testament more than we would the Old Testament right now. Like, we don't do animal sacrifices and things like that because the law has been fulfilled. But we still use things like the law. We use the Ten Commandments, and Psalms and stuff like that are still really good to use. And all the stories and stuff have things you can learn from them. Still, it's not like they have no purpose. It's just they're written more to the Jewish audience than they are to the Gentiles.
Well, I mean, you could be like a 7-day Adventist and believe in Jesus, but also follow all of the Old Testament laws or something like that.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, but at the same time, I also think that even me as a non-believer, the Bible collectively is probably the greatest work ever combined in human history. I'm not sure you could compare it to anything. Even the Quran hasn't had even close to the amount of influence.
Yeah, and it's
up until recently.
And even if you don't believe any of the stuff in, I believe everything that's in there, but if you don't, you can't tell me that the moral philosophy that's in there of love everybody, of love your enemy, bless those who persecute. You can't tell me if the world obeyed a lot of what it says, it wouldn't be a better place.
Right. And I think a lot of what the New Testament says specifically, I mean, the New Testament. I would be a little more careful in the Old Testament, but
Yeah.
the New Testament, so for example, the New Testament is often very misconstrued on both sides, not just the non-believer side, not
Oh, yeah.
just Christian side. The Christian is going to use it to justify what they want. Like
And
the
the
whole
non-believer's gonna, and like we're gonna see in a minute, the non-believer is gonna try to use it to justify what they want.
right. So a non-believer is going to twist the scripture, take this one verse, twist it, and say, "Look, the New Testament is, for example, like I saw on Twitter the other day, misogynistic." Not realizing a few verses later, it literally destroys their entire argument. And then you go to like a Christian Protestant theology website, and it used to support basically that women are just, sandwich makers. And then you read a few verses down from there, and it destroys their entire argument. So if the New Testament is properly understood, I think it could fix a lot of disagreements.
Yeah,
But
no doubt.
the issue is that it's never properly understood in most cases.
The old Mosaic laws do every jot and tittle, but except for where you don't have, where he will let you work on the Sabbath, and he says you don't have to be circumcised and you don't have to wash your hands. So he makes up his own rules at the same time, and he thinks that nothing that a man takes into his mouth can defile him, even if it's broken glass, poison, LSD, or infectious pathogens, whatever, because he thinks the magic word.
He's clearly not God.
What? How do
I never remembered reading Jesus say you could eat glass.
Well, he's just like
I think I know he's getting something mixed up. The Mark 16 thing where it talks about going out and like getting bitten by snakes and stuff. That was, which we know is not, which I don't even think that was actually I think that was something the King James editors added in there. So, yeah, and this is where some understanding of history of translations and stuff comes in, but
yeah, this is just it's not good. He obviously doesn't like, for a dude that claims to have looked into all this stuff, he misunderstands basic Christian theology.
No, he hasn't looked into it. He admitted in one video that he's only interviewed the mythicists, and he hasn't interviewed anybody like scholarly.
Right, but you'd expect him to at least know that Jesus is supposedly God, right? You expect him to at least know basic things like this, but no, we're not gonna know this, right? Because we want to get rid of Jesus altogether.
God, he's clearly not some omniscient figure.
Absolutely right. This is not a guy that performed miracles. We know that the miracles are made up. We know
what? that was a giant leap in logic, but okay.
That all of these things, he has so many other elements added to his story that were evidently taken from the stories of other gods.
Nope.
Which gods? Like, I would love for them to elaborate, but they don't. They just make giant leaps in logic, leave it there, and then like, see, we're right.
Yeah, pagan myths thing. I would encourage everybody to read the blog post that Tim O'Neill writes, which he and Aron have already went at it once or twice on Twitter, and they also went at it on his blog, which was really funny because it's two very like people who think they know everything arguing with each other. But but the pagan gods thing, I would encourage everybody also to read what's his name? Bart Ehrman's book, Did Jesus Exist? Because he goes over why the whole pagan god thing, it's really just first of all, scholars have rejected that for almost 100, no, I wouldn't say 100 years. It's just been a very long time.
Right. I think, didn't even like Richard Carrier admit that the case for it being copied off of other gods is like super slim?
There's like he only thinks that it can really go to two, and the two he picks are also poor candidates. So he picks, what's his name? he picks Inanna, which he says that she was crucified, but she wasn't. She was turned into a piece of meat and hung up on a hook. And then what's his name? I can't remember the other guy's name, but there's three versions of his story, and in each one of them, he like doesn't even die. He just goes into a cave and then walks out a couple days later. And then the other ones, he like dies, but one of them he stays dead, and then the other one he does some weird stuff. I think he like drinks magic water or something to come back to life. I don't remember.
Right.
It's
And
been
you
a
know
while
what's
since I looked at this.
you know what's funny is like when they always bring up this stuff. Like I was talking with Godless Engineer earlier today on Twitter, and he like brought up all the other resurrection of gods, and like I didn't say anything, but I was like, hold on, all the examples that you came up with are all examples, I believe, at least the ones he gave me, are all examples after Jesus and the Gospels. So what you're saying is that these myths copied off of Jesus, not the other way around. And it's just, it's like they have to really mess up the timeline of this stuff.
Yeah, and also that most of the gods that they list are part of something called mystery cults, and do you know why they're called mystery cults?
Because we know little to nothing about them.
Yeah, so you can't. The texts are all super late. You have to piece things together. Yeah, it's just. I mean, look at one of Richard Carrier's videos. He talks about these comic book versions of these stories, and I'm just like, no, these are not comic book versions of these stories. We know almost nothing about them at all. But
Make the childhood escape that was adapted from Moses, that was in turn adapted from Sargon, and so forth.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean,
Moses was not
if you think there
adopted
was
from
a historical
Sargon.
Jesus, fine.
Right.
I don't understand why there's issue with that.
Well, let me ask you about that, because I have a theory for why people treat me that way. If it sounds surprising to you, it's really not surprising to me. So, humans are biased. I think we can agree on that. Atheists are humans. Atheists are biased humans, just like anybody else.
Yeah.
We have these tribal instincts. We have biases against the people who are different from us, and we certainly have biases against people who hate us and people who lie about us and tell mean things about us, and that's what Christians do. So, to me, it seems.
Okay,
What?
wait. You're telling me atheists don't do this too? Wait, hold on. Wait. That was. Ugh.
It's inconsistent for atheists to say that they're rational, but then call me a fake atheist. It's inconsistent, but it's perfectly natural. It's perfectly predictable, because that's the way politics are. That's the way tribal politics are. And so for me, this is a really interesting position where you and I can agree that it doesn't make you a fake atheist if you agree with the mainstream scholars on this topic. But boy, there's a bunch of very loud atheists who will take issue with that. If you ever want to see what that's like, go on an atheist forum and say, you think there probably was a historical Jesus, and see what kind of grief you get for that. So for me, what's exciting about this topic is there's an opportunity for us as atheists to confront the biases that the atheist community has and rise above them and show that we as atheists are able to recognize our own bias, not let it control us, and be more rational than, say, Christians or Muslims or what have you. So it's this crazy tribal political problem that I find interesting. That's what makes the topic worthwhile for me. Historically, it doesn't really matter whether there was a Jesus, but sort of for the soul of the atheist community, if we can't be...
Okay, so why does it matter? I guess maybe we should preface this. Why does it matter that an atheist accepts
the truth?
Accepts that Jesus existed? The reason is because then you're actually showing that you have an interest in what is true. If you deny it and you come up with weird, crazy conspiracy theories, no one's gonna listen to you. No one's gonna.
Well, no, they will listen to you, but nobody that knows anything relevant will listen to you.
Right. It's kind of like, it's important because it shows that, you know, the non-believer has an interest in what is true and not just an interest in destroying Christianity in any possible way they can.
Yeah, and they talked about Christians being biased, but some of the most intelligent people I know are Christians, and it's not just not intelligent and like a non-relevant field at all. A lot of them are philosophers, scientists. I know some. I know some people who are going for their PhDs in the history where Christians that are going areas that are. This is very important. So it's not that every single Christian is biased either, like he tried to make it out to be. I mean, we have biases, but you get what I'm saying. It's not like we just like. It's not like I just read everybody who agrees with me and like throw out everybody else who doesn't.
Right. I think this is a point that I always try. Like, though our channel is based around elevating the dialogue, I guess you could say, is being able to have actual intellectual conversations about religion and
Politics.
philosophy and politics and stuff like that without all the, destroy Christianity or destroy atheism or destroy whatever the heck else. It's about actually talking through these things and not just,
Oh, I hate your view. No, I hate yours more.
your view is wrong because
I hate it.
because I'm a rational person and I left, therefore it's false, kind of thing.
I swear I've heard Aron Ross say that before. But
Yeah,
anyways,
they
let's
probably
keep
did
going.
somewhere.
Rational about this topic. What does that say about us and our claim to be driven by evidence? So that's my point.
Okay, you might want to check your camera because for whatever reason your screen went black. Yeah, now it's hard. I know how it is to have within the atheist community, as you say, when you can agree with somebody on on 80% of so many things, and then you find that one disagreement. Okay, there's one thing, and for me, that's not a huge deal. I mean, there may be something that I find really objectionable, but I'm still going to be able to look at all of the things we agree on, and whether you are an ally in helping me achieve what I want our group to achieve, or for the political standard or the recognition. I want us to be recognized as a demographic, a significant.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and the problem we have with that is, of course, religious people will vote exactly how they're told to vote, so they're very much sheep.
What?
Hold on. I can literally swear some of the most diametrically opposed people in politics are religious people
Most
of the same religion.
Most of them are. That's why you've got progressives that go like completely one way, and then you've got
centrists, and then you've got libertarians, and then you've got conservatives, and then you've got like extreme right people,
extreme left,
and extreme left Christians. Like, this is not.
It's not like everybody goes in the same boat.
It's not like literally every Christian in America is just like, oh, all right,
Donald Trump.
Like, if that's how it happened,
then
Donald Trump would be in office.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. Like, he's making like we just jump onto a boat and vote the whole way, but majority of America is I think 70% of America is Christians, and so that means if we all just voted the same way, then
yeah, in half of religious Twitter is just religious people arguing with each other, like in the same religion. Like, it's like some Christian arguing with, it's like some Protestant arguing with the Catholic, or some, like, this is not. We don't just we're not all brainwashed zombies that just follow whatever.
Yeah, or they're arguing stuff like predestination and stuff like that. Or they're arguing, is Trump better than Biden? Which he is, but
you said we wouldn't get political, Gabe. All right.
It's already been 40 minutes.
And one of the problems with that is that I see is once you have that one disagreement, and I mentioned this on stage.
Hey, fast forward it to the.
I agree with 80% of everything that he just said. The guy was on stage.
Fast forward it about.
So now I must hate him and campaign against everything he ever does.
25.
Call him a Nazi and every other thing. Because that's the way we tend to be.
Yeah.
Right there.
Full story, and then we'll go back.
Okay. I couldn't give you a year, but we know that it wasn't the guy that was born in what Christians would think of as the year 0 or the year 1.
Right. All right. Stop. He already made something. He already made something stupid. He's already. Wait. Keep going. But he's about to start talking about
We
the.
had a cult that already exists, and there was conflicting versions of it, so nobody can agree on what their character is. So you have the Ebionites who say that Jesus was only a human, a prophet. You have the
That's. These are. Hold on. Stop. These are late debates. The earliest Christian community clearly believed that Jesus was the Son of God and he was divine. I mean, Paul talks about him, though he having the form of God, left his heavenly abode, came down, took on the form of a man to die for. I don't remember the rest of it, but you get what I'm saying. It wasn't. It was like clear as day that this is what the early Christians believe. This is what all of our sources indicate. This is what all the early church fathers say. You know, this is what our earliest gospels say. All of our most of our manuscripts agree. I mean, it wasn't a massive debate until the turn of the 2nd century, whenever some idiots like, yo, man, I don't think Jesus.
even like the agnostics believed in a deity of Christ. Like
It was just he got like deified at some point.
Yeah, they believed in like a type of deity of Jesus. I mean, it was weird, but they still believed in the type of Jesus. And so it just seems absurd to kind of like be like, oh, hey, they can't agree, therefore.
Yeah. By the way, he says that obviously Paul didn't believe Jesus was recent. If you look at Galatians 3:1, it says, "You foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? It was before your eyes that Jesus Christ was publicly exhibited and crucified."
Right. It's kind of like, hold up. Yeah, it's such a weird, like,
It also talks about he also talks about being the Jews killing him, and then we've got early sources talking about Pilate killing him. We got Tacitus and Josephus talking about the prefect Pilate killing him, and we know when Pilate lived, so we obviously know when Jesus would have had to have died at some point, and it was not 500 years before the year 0. But he's going to discard Josephus and all of them later. But his reasons. He also is going to lie in a couple minutes because he's going to say that his argument against Jesus in the second Josephus passage didn't come from Richard Carrier, but it does. That's the only place it pops up. So,
and any pretense to humanity is merely an illusion.
That's right.
And so we have where people try to blend these things together. And you get a lot of people making excuses and trying to judge the apologetics that we still see today. When you ask somebody who owned the potter's field and how did Judas die, then you're going to get all kinds of backflips to try to
backflips.
Contradictions.
Oh my God!
They both can't be correct.
Can you keep going on how this cult developed and how it left the traces?
I am. But anyway, so you have people doing their apologetics. And so when you have a person, let's say you have a person who is said to exist, or maybe even actually existed, who was born in Nazareth, or maybe he was born somewhere else, maybe he's in Galilee, but he's supposed to be born in Nazareth, or maybe we have to come up with an excuse for how he's really accounted for here when he was born here, or his followers say he was born here, but the opposite, that he was supposed to be born here. So what is our excuse we have to make up? And so you start coming up with the erroneous census that never happened. And then
so what about literally all the contradictory accounts in the rest of history?
Yeah, things like the burning of Rome. Some people, or I think Tacitus says that Nero is responsible. Some other person says no, he's not even there. Or taught things about Alexander the Great are contradictory, or a lot of Plutarch's lives are contradictory.
Or the stuff in like the Quran is contradictory.
Or I mean, or things like, I guess you can say modern stories are contradictory in some senses because some people will not remember things correctly. Like some people say, no, it was a woman that shot me. The other person will be like, no, it was a guy.
It was a guy with long hair or something.
Yeah, but they're contradictory and they're not just in peripheral details. It's a pretty important part of the story that gets left out. I mean, I'm not making like the whole Jim Wallace argument thing, but you get what I'm saying. A lot of times in history, things become quote unquote contradictory when they're really not. It's just you're reading it with a Western mindset. And so you're trying to impose the English language on things that were not written in the English language. And you trying to use your
How
linguistic.
many people speak Koine Greek? Like, I mean,
Well, you have to know their practices and stuff too. And when you know that, you can look at these things a lot better than people can. And it's just, it's not the same. There's a bunch of language barriers and stuff when you try to impose a Western mindset onto things that aren't written in a Western language.
right.
To migrate to Egypt to fulfill some other bullshit excuse.
Exactly. Bullshit.
So you start coming up with all of this nonsense. But at some point, there was a necessity to make this an actual God. And I don't know how they come together with making it an actual God. But it seems that at the very beginning of actual Christianity, as we know it today, I mean, when you look at the church fathers, like right at the end of the 1st century, beginning of the 2nd century, you have people that are, one like Paul, for example, who never talks about a historical Jesus. And then
Yes. What?
Yeah, he talks about Jesus being killed by the Jews. He talks about Jesus teaching on marriage. Talks about Jesus having an actual brother.
He talks.
Yes.
He cites creeds with Jesus rising from the dead.
He talks about Christ being killed before the Galatians, like I just mentioned earlier. So, clearly that's and since he denies,
And he
Carrier's
mentions Jesus' brother.
No, that's clearly like that is
Oh,
clearly.
I forgot. There's like some secret society thing going on. There's like some like Men in Black
Christians that, for some reason, the best disciples weren't invited to it.
Yeah, you know, they only take in
James,
outcasts.
but then they don't accept Peter or the original 12. Those guys aren't. Those guys aren't clearly good enough Christians for it. But yep, we're gonna.
Yeah, let's take in a murderer, a non-believer, and a few other people that we just don't know about, and make a secret society that then were known as the brothers, and then
of the Lord.
Yeah, and then they all came together and wrote the New Testament and Paul's letters, but then everything else in the New Testament is a forgery. But I don't know. It's like Men in Black, but 2,000 years ago.
Anybody who sees anything about them gets their memory wiped.
They just get brainwashed. Just like Paul takes out a laser gun.
Richard Carrier will be correct. He's a spaceman.
Space Jesus.
All right, let's keep going.
Justin Martyr, one of the early church fathers, who also details how Jesus cannot be the historical Jesus. He can't be the guy that lived a generation or two before.
Wait, what?
Justin Martyr.
Yeah, no, he's going to say Justin Martyr talks about Satan copying.
So Justin Martyr is one of the church fathers, and he is describing Jesus as a ripoff of all of the Greek and pagan gods.
No, he was rebutting that. He was saying Jesus isn't a ripoff of all the other gods.
Yeah, and in any case, okay, I don't care what Justin Martyr said. I don't care what he said, because we can quote other church fathers that would almost certainly disagree with him on this issue if he didn't think he would live one or two. Paul didn't believe that Jesus lived one or two generations ago, because he clearly says that the Galatians he's talking to, Jesus was killed in front of them.
Right.
So clearly he believes that Jesus was executed 10 years ago. It was very recent. It wasn't like some event hundreds of years ago. No, it was a couple years ago.
The whole Justin Martyr thing, Justin Martyr was an apologist, right? So he was rebutting the pagan heresy or whatever they would consider it.
And he's talking about how Satan counterfeited Jesus and copied him into Hercules and Isis and all the Hellenistic gods.
What? I have never heard someone butcher the church fathers so much. How? I don't. Has to be a talent of some kind. Like, does he practice this before he goes to bed? Because, wow.
Yeah, I don't know where he got it from.
How much? Like, I would almost bet my mom's paycheck that he has not even read a sentence of Justin Martyr or any of the church fathers.
I'll bet I'll bet you even more. He hasn't read anything regarding to Josephus studies or Tacitus studies either. But we'll get into that when he talks about it.
Okay, before we get to Justin Martyr, there's Paul in the four Gospels. So those are an important part of the narrative that you skipped. Can you cover those?
I was.
Okay.
So at some point, as I said, you have the apologetics where you have to start making up excuses to justify things. And you have people who want to believe that they're not into the spiritual Jesus. They're into the old Ebionite concept of Jesus that walks among us.
Yeah.
So now they have to come up with some kind of way of blending these two. You've got these two disparate ideas, both kind of focusing on the same character. So somebody comes up with a story, and it is not written by Matthew or by Mark. Or,
no, of course not. That's right.
Creators all think that these are eyewitness accounts. None of them give any indication that they are eyewitness accounts, or even necessarily that they even could be eyewitness accounts.
Exactly. No,
they're written as stories.
Nope.
And not stories from a first-hand account. They're just
nope.
That's right. At no point does any of these gospels say, "And I saw."
That's right.
Or me, and none of that. So
I mean, that's
Caesar
not
never says that in his accounts of the Gallic Wars.
Yeah, and Plutarch, when he writes his lives of the life of Alexander or the life of Julius Caesar or things like that, he doesn't say "I saw," even though we trust him with a source for it. I'm going to contest the point that he said that the Gospels don't claim to have eyewitness testimony in them. They actually do. So Luke, his opening is literally, "Hey, I interviewed all these eyewitnesses. I went and read these sources so that I could confirm what I've heard." And then Mark, the ending of Mark is very interesting. So I forget which chapter it is, but it says, it's chapter 16. When the angel tells the women to go tell the disciples, he says something interesting. He says, "Go tell the disciples," and then he says, "and Peter," but Peter's included in the disciples. So what you have to realize is, again, this is where that Western, Middle Eastern thing comes in. What writers would do back then is they would name somebody like out of the blue just for no reason. Like they've got no relevance to the story whatsoever. And they would name them because they would name them based off of things like that. So this is what's happening. This is what seems to be happening in the ending of Mark. Mark seems to be letting us know that indirectly that this is where he got his information from, was from Peter. You can also see this in some Gospels forms of a story where one Gospel won't name a character, but then the next one will name the character. The reason why is because that Gospel, Luke does it a lot, and that's probably where he got his interviews from, was because he actually met the people themselves, and the disciples didn't really take time to know the person because they're like, "Wow, Jesus just did a miracle."
Right. Let's see. Let's continue this disaster.
Is a reconciliation of contradictions. Yeah, this is like where you have Isaiah 45. You have God saying that I created good and evil, and there is none beside me. And then Jesus comes along and says, "I sit beside God," and God says, "You shall have no other gods before me." And then Jesus says that the only way to get to the Father is but through me. So now, how do you reconcile these contradictions? How do you? Because
they're not contradictions at all.
We've come up with more excuses, more apologetics, more conflict and logical concordance to try to figure out how we can reconcile it. So that's where the Gospels came from. You have the first of them, and there's a blend there too, because as I said, if the Markan Passion narrative is actually based retrospectively on something that Josephus wrote a century later than was added, or a century later than was added in, that kind of makes sense if they're talking about Jesus ben Ananias, and because there was another place where they talk about like 19 different Jesusi. Josephus
19 different
Gabe,
Jeezy.
brother of Jesus the Anointed, right? And so the Christians all come and say, well, that's our Jesus. That's clearly our Jesus, except that it's talking about Jesus of Damnius,
Nope.
which is definitely a different person, but the Christians are still claiming that that's their God.
Hey,
Well, we
can
know
you
it's
stop?
not.
Can you
And they're
stop
like,
right here? I guess every single Josephus specialist must be a Christian, even though most of them are Jews, because they all say the same thing that the Christians are saying, that this is a reference to Jesus, not Jesus ben Damnius, not not Jesus ben Ananias. No, it's Jesus from the Bible. They all think that. That's a very that's not a majority view. That's a consensus. It's not, there's one or two here that have tried to stray from that, but it's a majority view and it's a consensus view, and that's why Carrier has to try so hard to argue against it in his book, and he does so very poorly. And then for him to say things like 19 different Jesuses is somehow evidence against his existence is really dumb, because that just means the name was common.
Right.
Is their guy? Well, then what about Jesus ben Ananias down there in Mark? And the other Jesus, the unnamed Jesus that Josephus mentions among the three people on the crosses that he takes down, which is mirrored. And Luke,
Oh my
same story from the opposite perspective. As if let's mention for a moment that Luke was an eyewitness account, well then so was Josephus an eyewitness account. They're looking at each other and telling the same story from two different angles.
Wait.
I remember Josephus, and I would encourage everyone listening to go.
Pause. Wouldn't that be kind of good for the Gospel of Luke to be for Josephus to be confirming something that Luke says? And then he's talking about they're mirroring Josephus, but Mark was written before Josephus wrote the book Antiquities of the Jews. Antiquities of the Jews was written around the year 90, and Mark was written, to me, I think Mark was written in the 50s, but the majority view is around 68 to 72. So, I mean, that's about a good 20 years later than the majority view would say. So, it ain't looking good for old Nelson over there.
Look into Josephus. The references to Jesus are pretty short and pretty easy to read. So if you remember Josephus one way, I remember another, I would just encourage our listeners to look it up. So why? Okay, so I asked you for a hypothesis for how everything started. You feel like you're done?
No, because
I keep going. Yeah, please keep going.
All right, so you have this reconciliation.
Yeah.
People used to have, well, they want to blend the Ebionite with Docetic, have the Gnostic thing. Yeah. They put their spiritual and their corporeal Jesus into the same character. So you create stories, and you have this cult, which is all based on visions. So nothing actually happens. I mean, look at Paul, for example. They celebrate every dream as if it had significance, every hallucination, everything you can make yourself see. And they
speak in tongues, right? And they prophesy, and they listen to angels, and they do all sorts of crazy stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm embarrassed to see my background wasn't the standard Christian perspective a lot of other people are familiar with. I was more the neo-pagan occultist, but I was also practicing transcendental meditation and things like this. And you do the same thing in every one of these kind of spiritual cult-like behaviors.
No.
You are trying to make yourself see just beyond what your eyes can see. In other words, make stuff up.
Yeah.
And so when these people talk about these visions, and that's all Paul is doing, is he's talking about visions as if they really happened. So he expresses that he never actually saw Jesus in real life. But then later in the same book, he himself said, "Have I not seen Jesus?" Well, no. You could already say, and now you're because it's a vision, because you can't tell visions from reality.
But in the whole Gospel of John, for example, whole Gospel of John, they practically come out and say, "Oh, we heard this stuff in prayer. Jesus told us this." While
what?
So people tell you that it's not historical.
What?
So the important
where are they getting this information?
The pagan gods, and acknowledges that Jesus is a ripoff of all of them. But he posits that Satan created all of these other gods as a copy of Jesus.
Yeah.
So Jesus, and I want to specify, he does not imply, or evidently even imagine, that Satan is a time traveler.
Yeah.
So Satan didn't go back in time and create these gods from centuries, many centuries before Jesus, and then make them duplicates of him. He made the old god duplicates of Jesus after Jesus, which means that Justin Martyr is not talking about a guy who lived a generation or two before him. It's not somebody his grandfather might have met.
Yeah.
Martyr puts Jesus as prophesied in Psalm 19. He says that Jesus was literally the Son.
Yeah.
And so Justin Martyr, could have known people who knew Jesus if Jesus was an actual historic person.
Yeah.
He was that close.
Yeah.
And yet he thinks Jesus lived centuries before the old gods.
Yeah, well, Paul knew people who knew.
The whole historic.
Paul knew the closest disciples of Jesus, and he clearly met Galatians, who saw Jesus being executed. So, I mean, it's clearly one of them has to be wrong, and I'm going to go with assuming that you're reading it correctly, which apparently you're not, because nobody else reads it the same way that you do. But Justin Martyr's writing way later than Paul. And Paul tells us in Galatians 3:1 again that who has bewitched you, Galatians, because you saw Christ crucified. How could they see him in front of him? It says he was exhibited, meaning he was taken out, and he was crucified before them. How could he be crucified before a group of people? And what are you going to say, that they all had a vision?
Maybe.
They all had a vision of Jesus being crucified. Yeah. And then he talks to the closest disciples. They say the same thing that he's saying. They confirm the gospel that he's preaching, which was Christ was crucified a couple of years, and like everything else he said. So that means that they're also confirming that Christ was crucified like about maybe a decade ago. So I really don't care what Justin Martyr says. We've got confirmation from Paul, who was our earliest one of our earliest accounts, who knows the earliest disciples, who knows all the early Christians, who pretty much sets up the early church and its hierarchy. And you're going to try to use a late source to try to dictate what the early consensus was, which is, it's just, I mean, you pride yourself in being a skeptic, and then you try to be skeptical of sources like Josephus for the existence of Jesus, but then you're going to use Justin Martyr on something that he wouldn't even be relevant to the discussion on.
Right. So it's so weird. Not even like, I don't understand his point.
Oracle Jesus thing right there.
Okay, is that your hypothesis?
Yeah.
Okay, so you started out with the cult already in progress. So you never talked about how the cult was founded. Now this was a doomsday cult, right?
I don't know that it started that way. It would have been 1st century BC or 2nd century BC, and I'm leaning for 1st century BC.
So what's the evidence? I've never heard anybody provide any evidence that the Jesus cult started before around AD 30. So what's your evidence that the Ebionites or the Docetics or whatever were in the 1st century BC or 2nd century BC?
We already have, by the time Paul starts writing.
Yeah.
When he starts writing.
Yeah.
There's already an established religion with
exactly. That's
fire.
So he clearly didn't start it. Like, he was already there.
Right. So it's already well established. More than you think it could have been if it had actually been a guy who lived 30 years earlier.
Well, I mean, I'm reading the same books and I come to an opposite conclusion, so that's pretty subjective.
Okay. How do you construct this entire hierarchy in just 30 years of mass transit or mass communication?
I don't know what hierarchy you're talking about.
Oh my! He's talking about Paul talking to pastors and deacons and priests and stuff. And his entire argument is that they couldn't have formed that hierarchy in 30 years. And therefore, Jesus had to live before the year 0. I'm pretty sure it doesn't take that long to go, okay, you're the leader, you're second in command, you do this, you do this, you do this.
Right. It's so weird.
I mean, you pride yourself of being a quote-unquote skeptic, but then you say stuff like this. I hope he actually responds in this video. This will be funny.
Yeah.
The church, you have all of these office positions.
I don't know what you're... Okay, so now you're describing a very different early church from what the mainstream historians describe.
I'm talking about what Paul himself described.
So if you look at Paul, he never talks to anybody as having an official office. Nobody has an office. Nobody has a named office.
Wrong.
The churches don't have priests. They don't have people leading them. There are no bishops.
Does the audio work? All of what you just said is wrong. Paul
Okay.
has an established hierarchy of office positions within the church. He does in fact say all the things you just said he didn't say.
I think that's another great thing for our listeners to go look up. Right? If you look at the early church, there were no official leaders. There was no liturgy.
There were bishops and deacons. He names those specifically. So
Okay, so right.
Already established.
And who were those bishops?
He does. I don't know that he names all of the bishops. Does it?
No, but what role did they play?
Their administrative offices within the court. No,
Okay.
what other levels they have? Why would they need one?
So a bishop.
Mhm.
So the bishops that we know today are modeled after Roman authoritarian rule, and they started to appear in Christianity around AD 100, and by AD 150 there were bishops all throughout Christendom. But for the first century, there were no bishops the way you and I think of a bishop. Bishop means overseer.
Why did Paul describe that?
I'll get right. That's a really good question. So here's what Paul said.
He exists.
If you look at the first century,
He not only says they already exist, they have existed. They pre-exist Paul. So,
right, so these
religion with offices.
well,
Right.
okay, so every church congregation, because there was no official hierarchy, there was no church hierarchy, every congregation was led by elders. You just get a bunch of the old men together and they make decisions. There's no one leader. There's no ritual that turns you into a priest. Presbyter means elder. Priest means elder. Bishop means superintendent. And those two terms are used interchangeably. Deacon means servant. So what you had was the elders of a congregation, not any particular office, nothing official, but just a loose conglomeration of these are the people who are leading the congregation. And then they had deacons, servants to do what have you. But there was nothing like a bishop to tell people what to do. No one could describe a liturgy or define scripture or explain a theology. It was all just sort of
He did.
Paul?
Yes.
Exactly. That's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up. Is that Paul?
You keep saying that Paul didn't say that these things didn't exist that Paul said existed before.
So Paul showed up and he provided a theology
That he said pre-existed.
If you look at the creed before Paul, it doesn't talk about the crucifixion.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't have to, because as I said, if Paul is writing at the time that he is supposed to have written, and the Mark and Passion is actually based on something Josephus said, and another guy who didn't even live in that century, Jesus ben Ananias, well, then it makes perfect sense. The explanative thing is that, that's why Paul didn't mention the crucifixion, because it wasn't part of the theology. It wasn't part of the theology until Josephus died.
Well, hold on. Paul mentions the crucifixion. That's his big point. Maybe you need to read Romans again, but Paul's big point is the crucifixion. The people before Paul did not make a big deal about the crucifixion.
But he doesn't give any details about that. It's not like the story that we have. We know that everybody was getting crucified. We know that the Romans were crucifying a lot of people. So the fact that this character gets crucified by the most common means may or may not imply that he was a historical character or was just a common means of death at that time.
Right. So what I'm saying is, before Paul, there was no real reference to the crucifixion, and then Paul came along and made up the blood magic thing, and that's where you get the crucifixion is Jesus shed blood for a pure soul taking on the curse of humanity. But that did not exist before Paul. So before Paul, there was no scripture, there was no defined liturgy. Paul does not mention bishops. I think maybe we can look that up. They are mentioned in other places, but when you read Paul's letters, he's writing to churches. He never says, "Hey, Mr. Bishop, this is what you should do." He never says, "You guys should all listen to what your bishops tell you to do." Even in the church that he set up himself, there's no authority to tell people what to do. So you have these weird factions, like you said, those Docetists who say weird things, and nobody can tell them to shut up because there's no church hierarchy. There's no authority to tell people no.
And yet, he says, he doesn't talk about a single hierarchy. I'll grant you that. As a matter of fact, his situation, the situation he describes, is much more disparate than what we know. Because while I was talking about a different collection of Jesuses, or GCI, right? And so we have a composite character. The explanative evidence is that there's a composite character. We have Paul himself, who says not only that the church is established and already divided, because there's different people in different areas,
right?
They're all preaching according to vision, and they're coming up with different ideas. But it's not just people that are coming up with different ideas, because he says that there are angels who are wandering amongst people who are also telling stories about Jesus, and they're talking about different GZI.
Yeah, he loves angels.
So how the hell do we get? Now, I've got some guy who apparently, I don't know if he had a stroke or if he saw a lightning strike. I think a stroke is more likely, given the descriptions I've read about Paul. I have this character who believes in visions and had a stroke, and now he thinks he's heard the voice of God. That the other people around him apparently didn't share that experience. Or I have an angel, right, who's going to tell me about the different pieces. Which one of these people am I going to buy? And if I can verify that the guy is actually an angel, I'm probably going to side with him. But the point is, we have multiple angels. Talking about multiple Jesuses. So but the problem with Jesus being a historical character is that there's more than one Jesus. And we have all these conflicting stories. We've got 4 Gospels that contradict each other, which are the 4 we kept out of the 16 we know about, right? Or maybe there were.
Well, that's not exactly fair. You make that out as if those 4 are not special. But those four are different from the other gospels.
Granted, those four are different, and all of them are different.
So they're earlier than the other gospels, and the synoptic gospels agree with each other better. And in fact, Mark precedes Josephus. We do talk about Mark and Luke being based on Josephus. Josephus comes after those gospels have already been
At the same time.
Well, I would encourage our listeners to look it up and find out for themselves what order those books are written in. So on the topic of Jesus, it's true that there are lots of reports of people named Jesus because it was a very common male name. It was not an angel's name. Angels at that time had names like Michael, and no boys were named Michael. Angels were Gabriel or Uriel, and Jesus was a boy's name. So the idea that there would be a celestial being named Jesus doesn't make any sense.
Why would we have? Just think about this. We're talking about explanative hypotheses.
Yeah, that's right.
Hypotheses. By the hypothesis that Jesus was a historical character in 30 CE,
yeah,
you do have an explanation for how we have multiple angels wandering around telling stories of different Jesuses. Now, by my hypothesis, that is accounted for. By yours, it is not. My hypothesis accounts for the fact that Justin Martyr says that Jesus is older than all the old gods. Your hypothesis does not account for that.
So you're reading Justin Martyr differently from how historians do. There's just a whole bunch of
I mentioned at the beginning that historians just take what they've been told that Jesus was a real character.
Nope, that is not what they do.
They just take what they're told, Gabe.
I can't believe that he would say that mainstream. Yeah, well, I can believe he would say that because he's a Carrier fanboy. But I can't believe that he would doubt their integrity like that. I mean, these are the guys who write. I mean, these are professionals. These are the best. But I think it again goes back to something you said earlier. They will do anything that they possibly can to take any creative or credibility that Christianity has away. And since the professionals happen to agree with most Christians on this, then they're going to try to dismiss them any way they can.
Let's see, what is it? I think I watched this. I think in a few minutes he says something really dumb I wanted to point out.
Notice. And I've actually seen a historian do this where they read that passage of Justin Martyr that I just read to you, that word told you about, and they read that and they interpret it that Jesus, or that Justin Martyr believes that Satan is a time traveler. Nowhere in that passage does Justin Martyr imply that Satan went back in time. Nobody ever.
And nowhere in Paul's passage does he talk about
what Jesus is. There was prophecy that Jesus was going to come. We can't.
Nowhere in Paul's messages does he talk about space Jesuses either. But hey.
Just Paul's sorry, Elon Musk sent him to Mars. Jesus was actually a Martian. Did you know that?
Richard Carrier would be like, see, I told you guys all these years he came from outer space.
They just show up on Mars and the robot just finds a drawing, just be like, Jesus was here.
No, he just finds Jesus just sitting there drinking coffee, and he's like, knew you guys would find me eventually. Had to visit my boy Paul 2,000 years ago.
No, but see, Jesus has moved on to other planets now.
He's moved on to Star Trek.
Yeah. See, Jesus is he's the last Martian. That's why he was able to resurrect,
Sounds like something Richard Carrier would say.
That was actually brought up in a debate I was watching. The guy's like, well, what if Jesus was an alien? And then the Christian goes, well, if he was an alien and he rose from the dead, obviously you should listen to him.
That's a good point.
Can't go there either because we can't go there either because even God can't see what the hell he's doing in advance because he's making mistakes and having to wipe the slate and start over again.
If you're saying that Justin Martyr would have to be inconsistent to think that there had been a historical Jesus, lots of people are inconsistent. The Gospels are inconsistent. Inconsistency is normal.
We're talking about which of our hypotheses has explanative power. I'm showing you mine does, and you're claiming yours doesn't.
So let me go back to what you just said about the historians. You're basically saying that all the historians who have looked into this question are just fools. You're not even addressing their evidence.
Why would you do that? I've noticed we jump into hyperbole, and that's not appropriate.
You just said that okay.
Debate with Carrier, for example. Carrier mentioned that the only peer-reviewed work prior to his was in the 1920s.
Only peer-reviewed book on this topic, yeah.
Right, exactly. Was in the 1920s. And so now he's written a recent one. So if you want to catch up, then you should read the recent work and not the stuff that's 80 years old. And you got a stickler on that and went hyperbole on him to say, oh, you're saying all the historians are 100 years behind you. No, you're not understanding what I'm saying. And you're jumping hyperbole on it. I'm not saying that every historian is a fool. I did explain that historians were told, they were raised to believe that he was a historical Jesus, that Jesus was a real guy, that never even questioned that. They read the passage, and then because they've got this preconceived notion that Jesus was historic and he lived at this time, and they've got it all mapped out where Jesus exists in this frame of space and time. And then they read this passage from Justin Martyr, and the only way that they can interpret that is they don't question what they were told since childhood, that maybe Jesus didn't exist in this time frame.
What childhood?
No, they jump right to Justin Martyr is assuming that Satan.
What? There's a whole. First off, his hypothesis has zero explanatory power, like zilch, zero. It can't explain why Paul talks about Galatians watching Jesus being killed. I mean, were these Galatians like hundreds of years old? You can't explain it can't explain the fact that Paul seems to indicate that Jesus was. He talks about a historical Jesus a lot. I mean, it's not as much as the Gospel of Mark, but it's still a lot. He talks about again Jesus being crucified. He talks about some of the teachings that Jesus taught. He talks about a lot of things. I'm gonna have to go in like 5 minutes.
Yeah, I do too. I wanted to get to like 50 minutes in this video, and then.
How much is left?
Well, if we get to 50 minutes in this video, there'll be like 29 left.
Well, how much? What are we at right now?
49.
Okay.
Is a time travel. That is not supported at all, but it's the only way they can reconcile it. They won't let go of the idea that Jesus existed between 0 and 30 CE.
So your explanation for why historical consensus is that there was a Jesus, your explanation for that consensus is that historians never question their premises and they just take it for granted, and that all the historians who look at this situation, they can't see what you see because they're too biased.
I wouldn't put it that way, but I have actually seen these historians we're talking about write things to that effect, where that everybody. I've actually seen one of the historians said, "Well, everybody knows Jesus was a historical character, so there's no point in even arguing it." You tell me that's not a bias.
That's. I mean,
just assuming everybody knows.
I'm agreeing that there is some bias out there for sure.
And among these historians, very often cite their own consensus.
Yeah,
and the consensus they're citing is guys who say that there's no point in arguing it because everybody knows this.
And so
it's circular.
So atheist historians, Jewish historians, they all share the same bias, and that's why they can't see things the way you do.
Even Bart Ehrman. Yeah, it's the same things that I'm talking about. Yeah. And even Bart Ehrman cited his own consensus at one point.
No, he didn't. I mean, he does, but he doesn't use that as their. He himself says that does not mean that Jesus existed.
Right.
He gives a whole plethora of reasons for believing that Aron doesn't even deal with that one once at all.
Yeah, it's so weird. But I think we're gonna end the stream here because I have work tomorrow, and I'm tired, and Gabe has to go. So, yeah.